Hey folks! Never in a million years did I think I'd be sharing something like this, but here we are. Buckle up because this one's gonna be a wild ride. My name's Jake, and I was married to a woman named Sarah for the past 6 years. Now, before you start imagining we were the picture-perfect couple, let me set the record straight, we weren't. But I thought we had something solid, you know? Things were rolling along just fine, or so I believed. Then, about a month ago, things started getting weird. Sarah's phone suddenly became glued to her. It never left her hand, like it was an extension of her arm. Every time it made a sound, she'd grab it faster than you'd believe, grinning at the screen like she'd just hit the jackpot. She started getting real sneaky, too. If I walked into the room, that phone got stashed away like she was hiding state secrets. And don't even get me started on the late nights. Out of nowhere, she suddenly had all these extra shifts at work. But let me tell you, in all the years I've known her, the only time she stayed up late was to binge-watch Friends on Netflix. Still, I played it cool, acted like I didn't notice. Part of me didn't want to believe what was starting to form in the back of my mind. We had a good life, a cozy home, why mess that up, right? But there was this nagging feeling in my gut that something wasn't sitting right. I tried to shake it off, bury it deep, because honestly, who wants to admit when something like that is happening? I sure didn't. Then, one night, everything flipped upside down. I was getting ready to head out on a quick business trip, just an overnight thing, nothing big, only a couple of hours away. We were sitting at the dinner table, chatting like normal, but something was off. Sarah was way too cheerful, like she couldn't wait for me to get out the door. And that's when it hit me. The whole vibe felt like she was waiting for a package or something, except this time, it was me who'd be leaving. Later that night, I overheard her talking on the phone, all hushed like a teenager sneaking out past curfew. Sarah was never great at keeping secrets, so it didn't take long for me to piece things together. I caught bits of her conversation, stuff like, "Tomorrow night's perfect, he'll be gone," and my personal favorite, "Don't worry, we'll have the place to ourselves." Real smooth, right? That night, lying next to her in bed, I couldn't sleep. There was this cold, slow-burn rage bubbling up inside me, but I kept my mouth shut. I needed to be smart about this. I wasn't about to blow up and give her the chance to cover her tracks. No, I had a plan forming. So there I was, lying next to my wife, who clearly had other plans for the next day. I could have called her out right then and there, could have grabbed her phone and demanded to know who she was sneaking around with. But nope, I was too mad for that. I wanted to hit her where it hurt, and surprise was gonna be my secret weapon. I wanted her caught in the act, no way out, no half-baked excuses. So I made the decision right then, I wasn't going on that business trip after all. The next morning, I told my boss I needed to take some personal time off. Thankfully, he's a solid guy and gave me the green light. My next stop? The electronics store. Dropped a good chunk of change on some high-tech surveillance gear, cameras, hidden mics, the whole shebang, all rigged up so I could monitor everything remotely. I wasn't about to mess this up. If she was gonna bring her new boy toy over, I'd have a front row seat to their little get-together. I set up everything while she was at work. I've seen enough spy movies to know where to hide cameras: living room, kitchen, bedroom, and yeah, even the bathroom. Anywhere she might take her friend, I was gonna see it. But I didn't just want to sit back and let this whole disaster unfold. Nope, I had another trick up my sleeve. We had dinner plans that night before I was supposed to leave, and guess who made the meal? Me. I threw in some of the strongest laxatives I could find, just to spice things up a little. Yeah, it was petty, I know, but when your wife's plotting to cheat on you in your own home, I say all bets are off. That evening, we sat down to eat, and Sarah was absolutely glowing. She must have thought she was being real clever, playing the part of the perfect wife while secretly planning to bring some other guy into our bed. I watched her eat, acting like I didn't have a single care in the world, knowing full well her night was about to take a sharp turn south. After dinner, I kissed her on the cheek, grabbed my suitcase, and said, "See you tomorrow night, babe." She waved me off, all smiles, playing the role of the dutiful wife, and off I went. Except, instead of heading to the airport, I drove about 10 minutes down the road to a hotel. I set up my laptop, connected it to the cameras, and waited. Let me tell you, watching your wife scramble around the house, cleaning up and getting ready for another man, is something you don't forget. She was all over the place, fixing her hair, slipping into some new dress I'd never even seen before. The nerve of it. Then the doorbell rang, and there I was, sitting in my hotel room, watching Sarah race to the door like some giddy teenager. She gave her hair one last fluff in the hallway mirror, smoothed out her dress, and opened the door for her so-called Prince Charming. But let me tell you, this guy looked more like the janitor from a rundown motel. I almost lost it, trying not to laugh at the sight of him. His name, as I'd later find out, was Chad. Because of course it was. Balding, with a beer gut that screamed he hadn't seen the inside of a gym in years. And this was the guy she was willing to risk everything for? I leaned back in my chair, cracked open a cold one, and settled in to watch the train wreck unfold. Chad strutted in, grinning from ear to ear, carrying a bottle of cheap wine like they were about to have some grand, romantic evening. They started chatting, laughing awkwardly like two teenagers on a first date, which made my skin crawl, knowing what was really going on. They poured some wine and sat on the couch, with Sarah trying her best to act cool. But I could tell something wasn't right. She started shifting in her seat, just a little at first, then more. I knew exactly what was happening. The laxative was starting to kick in. She excused herself, trying to play it off all casual, and made a beeline for the bathroom. Chad, bless his heart, just sat there, clueless, sipping his wine. Meanwhile, I'm watching her through the bathroom camera, and man, she was in trouble. She was sitting on the toilet, her face twisted in pure discomfort. It was clear the situation had escalated to full-on disaster mode, an all-out intestinal war. It was glorious to watch. The best part? She tried to make it quick, but this wasn't the kind of problem you could just brush off. After what felt like ages, she finally returned, looking a bit pale, and sat down next to Chad like nothing had happened. But I could see it in her eyes, she was panicking. Chad, still oblivious, started getting cozy, sliding closer, probably thinking things were about to heat up. But just as his hand slid up her leg, bam! She was up again, bolting for the bathroom. I almost choked on my beer from laughing so hard. By the time she came out the second time, it was clear her night wasn't going the way she'd planned. Chad was getting frustrated, and she was mortified. They tried to salvage the evening, but every time they got remotely close to anything intimate, Sarah had to make another desperate dash for the bathroom. It was like watching some twisted sitcom where the punchline just keeps landing, over and over. Meanwhile, I was back in my hotel room with a cold beer, enjoying the show like it was the best thing on TV. They even tried watching a movie, but Sarah couldn't sit still for more than a few minutes without excusing herself again. Eventually, Chad started catching on that something was seriously wrong. He kept asking if she was okay, and she kept lying through her teeth. "Oh, I'm fine, must have eaten something bad at lunch," she said. "Yeah, right. Must have been that salad you didn't eat, huh, Sarah?" As the night wore on, any chance of romance was long gone. Chad was getting annoyed, Sarah was beyond embarrassed, and the whole evening had turned into a complete disaster. They started bickering, with Chad accusing her of being distant, and Sarah snapping back, clearly frazzled and trying to keep it together, both emotionally and physically. She stormed off to the bathroom one last time, and that's when Chad had finally had enough. He got up, grabbed his jacket, and left without saying another word. I almost felt bad for the guy. Almost. Watching her sit there, alone and probably wondering how her perfect night turned into the worst date in history, gave me a satisfaction I can't even begin to describe. But the best part hadn't even happened yet. So there I was, still sitting in my hotel room, watching the aftermath of the most disastrous date unfold in real time. Sarah was by herself, probably replaying the whole evening in her head, trying to figure out where it all went wrong. Meanwhile, I was grinning ear to ear, knowing full well that the laxative was my doing. Yeah, it was petty, but after everything I'd seen, I figured I deserved a little revenge. She slumped onto the couch, completely worn out from her trips to the bathroom and the emotional wreckage of the night. She sent a few texts, probably trying to explain herself to Chad, but he didn't respond. Can't say I blame the guy. After dealing with that level of chaos, I'd have ghosted her too. She looked like she was on the verge of tears, but honestly, I didn't feel a thing. If anything, I felt a little smug watching her squirm. After a while, she gave up trying to salvage the night. She tossed her phone onto the couch and sat there, stewing in frustration. She was probably mad at Chad, at herself, at the universe for screwing up her little fling. What she didn't know was that the universe's name was Jake, and I wasn't done yet. By the time the next morning rolled around, I had a clear plan in mind. There was no way I was staying in a house where she was plotting behind my back. So, when I got home that afternoon, I didn't waste any time. As soon as I stepped through the door, Sarah perked up, acting like nothing had happened, like she hadn't been scrambling to hide her dirty little secret just hours earlier. "How was your trip?" she asked, flashing that fake smile she'd probably been rehearsing. I couldn't even look her in the eye. "We need to talk," I said, cutting right to the chase. That wiped the smile off her face real quick. "I know what you've been up to, Sarah," I began, and I could see her whole body tense up. Her eyes darted around, like she was desperately searching for some excuse or escape. She stammered something about not knowing what I was talking about, but I wasn't having any of it. "Don't. Just don't," I said, holding up my hand to stop her. "I've seen everything, the cameras, the texts, your little plan to have Chad over while I was gone. I know it all." Her face went white as a sheet. For a second, I thought she might faint, but instead, she switched to her next move, the tears. She broke down, crying, trying to plead her case. "Jake, it's not what you think," she sobbed. "I was just lonely, we've been so distant lately. I made a mistake, but I swear I didn't sleep with him. Nothing happened, I promise." I had to laugh at that. "Nothing happened because you spent the night stuck in the bathroom, Sarah." "I made sure of that," I said, watching her eyes widen in shock. "Yeah, I put laxatives in your dinner. Figured if you were gonna cheat on me in our house, the least I could do was make sure you didn't have a good time." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. She had nothing to say. The tears kept flowing, and she tried to reach out to me, but I took a step back. "Don't touch me," I snapped. "I don't care what you think or feel. You've been lying to me for who knows how long, and now it's over." She collapsed onto the couch, bawling her eyes out, but I didn't feel a thing. "You've got until the end of the week to pack your things and get out," I said coldly. "If you're not gone by then, I'll throw your stuff in the trash. And don't even think about trying to guilt me into anything. I've already filed for divorce. You're done." I saw the panic in her eyes. She knew I wasn't bluffing. "Please, Jake, I'll do anything," she begged, her voice trembling. "I was stupid, I know. We can fix this. I don't want to lose you." "Too late for that," I said, turning my back on her. "You didn't care about losing me when you invited that loser into our home. Now you've got to live with the consequences." I walked out of the living room, leaving her sobbing on the couch, and locked myself in the bedroom. There was no way I was letting her guilt trip me into forgiving her. No way I'd let her manipulate me into thinking this was something we could patch up. It was over. She knew it. I knew it. And soon enough, the rest of the world would know it, too. What she didn't realize was that I still had one last card up my sleeve. Now I wish I could say I felt satisfied after that showdown, but honestly, I was still mad. The whole situation felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from, and Sarah's tears did nothing to soften the blow. So, while she was in the living room crying, I locked myself in the bedroom and started working on the final pieces of my plan. You see, kicking her out and filing for divorce wasn't enough. I wanted her to feel the full weight of what she'd done. Sarah might have thought she could cheat on me in my own house and walk away with just a pathetic apology, but I wasn't about to let her off that easy. And Chad? Oh, he wasn't going to get away scot-free either. The next morning, I woke up before she did. It felt like living with a ghost. She'd spent the night in the guest room, probably crying herself to sleep, but frankly, I didn't care. I grabbed my phone and started making calls. First was to my lawyer to finalize the divorce papers. I wanted her served by the end of the week. Then I called Chad's wife. Yeah, you heard that right. This clown, Chad, had a wife. Her name was Jessica, and she had no idea what her dirtbag husband had been up to. Lucky for her, I did. So I called her that morning. It wasn't a conversation I was looking forward to, but it had to be done. The phone rang a few times before she picked up. Hello? She answered, her voice bright and cheerful. She had no clue what was about to hit her. Hi, Jessica, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. My name's Jake. I'm, Sarah's husband. There was a pause. I could almost hear the wheels turning in her head. Oh, Jake. Hi. Is everything okay? She asked, clearly confused. I took a deep breath and got right to the point. Listen, I hate to be the one to tell you this, but I think you need to know that Chad has been seeing my wife behind your back. They were planning to meet up at our house while I was supposed to be away on a work trip. I've got proof, and I thought you deserved to know. There was another long pause, and when she spoke again, her voice was much quieter. Are you sure about this? She asked. Unfortunately, yeah, I replied, feeling that familiar anger flare up again. I told Jessica I had emails, texts, and footage from security cameras, and that I could send her everything if she wanted. After hanging up, I glanced over at Sarah, still holed up in the guest room, probably hoping I'd changed my mind. Spoiler alert, I wasn't. Later that day, I met up with Jessica at a small coffee shop not far from where we lived. When I got there, I couldn't believe my eyes. Jessica was stunning. It made me wonder, how could Chad cheat on her with Sarah? I mean, my wife wasn't bad looking, but compared to Jessica, it was like trading in a Porsche for a beat-up minivan. Jessica looked heartbroken as I handed over the evidence I'd collected, emails, screenshots, even a few clips from the cameras. Watching her face crumble as she read through it all, I almost felt guilty for being the one to break the news. But she deserved to know the truth, and Chad had this coming. We sat there for a while, talking through the whole mess. She thanked me for telling her, but I could see she was shattered. She kept shaking her head, saying things like, "How could he do this?" And I thought we were happy. Before we left, we exchanged numbers. I told her if she needed any more proof or support, I'd be around to help. I wasn't trying to be her knight in shining armor, but with both of us going through this mess, I figured we might as well have each other's back. As I walked to my car, I realized that was the final nail in the coffin for Sarah's affair. She wasn't just losing me, Brad was about to lose his wife, too, and when that happened, the whole house of cards would come crashing down. But I wasn't finished yet. After meeting with Jessica, I felt a strange sense of calm. The ball was rolling, and it wouldn't be long before everything came tumbling down on both Sarah and Chad. They thought they could play me, thought they could play us both, but now the truth was out in the open. I couldn't wait to see how they dealt with it. That night, when I got home, Sarah was sitting at the kitchen table, looking like she hadn't slept a wink. She had this pitiful, hopeful look in her eyes, like maybe, just maybe, I'd changed my mind and forgive her. I didn't even bother entertaining the idea. "You've got 3 days," I said flatly, tossing a copy of the divorce papers onto the table. "I'll be staying at a friend's place until you're gone. If you're still here by the end of the week, I'll have the cops come to escort you out." Her eyes went wide with disbelief. "Jake, wait, please, we can talk about this. I didn't actually sleep with him. Can't we just—" I cut her off, not wanting to hear another word. "Don't. I don't care if you slept with him or not. You planned to, and that's enough for me. You betrayed me, Sarah. There's no fixing this." She tried to argue, tried to backtrack, to explain herself, but I wasn't listening. I was done with the lies, the excuses, the fake tears. Every word out of her mouth just felt like more manipulation. So I turned and walked away. I could hear her sobbing as I went upstairs to pack a bag, but it didn't faze me. I had bigger things on my mind. Before I left the house, I decided to drop one last bombshell. "Oh, by the way," I said casually as I stood in the doorway, I met up with Chad's wife today. Showed her everything. The look on Sarah's face was priceless. It was like the blood drained right out of her body. You what? She gasped, her voice trembling. Yep, I replied, leaning against the doorframe. Turns out, Chad's been lying to her too. She knows everything now. Wouldn't be surprised if she's already talking to a divorce lawyer. Sarah looked like she'd been hit in the gut. Her hands shook as she stared at me, panic written all over her face. Jake, no, you didn't. Why would you do that? This is between us. I couldn't help but laugh at her nerve. Between us? Are you kidding? You blew up our marriage, Sarah. Now you've got to deal with the fallout. Brad's wife deserves to know just as much as I did. Sarah stood up from the table, desperation all over her face. But Jake, I love you. I didn't want this to happen. I don't know what I was thinking. Can't we fix this? I shook my head slowly. You weren't thinking about me, that's for sure. You were thinking about yourself, about Chad. You didn't care about what this would do to me, to us. Now it's over. You made your choice, and now you've got to live with it. I walked out of the house, leaving her standing there in shock. Part of me wondered if she really thought I'd just let it slide, that somehow we could patch things up and move on. But that was never gonna happen. Trust, once broken, doesn't get repaired, and Sarah had shattered it beyond recognition. As I drove to my friend's place, my phone buzzed. It was Jessica. I confronted Chad, her text read. He tried to deny it, but when I showed him the proof, he broke down and admitted everything. I'm filing for divorce. I couldn't help but feel a grim sense of satisfaction. Brad and Sarah thought they could sneak around and live their little fairy tale, but their whole world was crumbling down around them, and they had no one to blame but themselves. Over the next few days, everything unraveled quickly. I crashed at my buddy Dave's place, and let me tell you, he was more than happy to hand me a beer and give me a good riddance speech when I told him what went down. Turns out, he never liked Sarah much, but kept it to himself until now. I appreciated the support, even though it felt strange to be sleeping on his couch while my soon-to-be ex-wife was back at home, figuring out her next move. Of course, Sarah tried every trick in the book to get me back. Texts, calls, voicemails, all filled with the same tired, desperate apologies. It was a mistake, Jake. I'll do anything to fix this. Please don't throw away our marriage. Yeah, as if I was the one who threw it away. She had done that the moment she started sneaking around behind my back. I ignored every single message. The only words left between us would be spoken in court. Meanwhile, things with Chad and his wife Jessica were blowing up too. She didn't waste any time. Within 48 hours, Chad got served divorce papers and was kicked out of their house. Apparently, he tried the same sob story Sarah had pulled on me, but Jessica wasn't having it. She was smart, strong, and wasn't about to be played for a fool. Jessica and I stayed in touch throughout all this. We weren't becoming best friends or anything, but there was this weird sense of solidarity between us. We were both dealing with the same betrayal, and it was nice having someone to talk to who really understood. We'd text every now and then, sharing updates on the fallout, almost like comparing notes. There was something strangely comforting about knowing I wasn't the only one whose life had been turned upside down. Then, on Friday that week, I got the message. It was from Sarah. Jake, I'm coming to pick up my things. Please be home so we can talk. I rolled my eyes. There was nothing left to say, but I figured it was time to officially get her out of my life. I agreed to meet her at the house, mainly because I didn't trust her to go through our stuff without me there. At this point, I wasn't taking any chances. When I pulled up to the house that afternoon, she was already sitting in her car waiting. She looked terrible, like she hadn't slept or eaten in days. Part of me felt a small flicker of pity, but that was quickly snuffed out by the memory of her betrayal. She'd made her bed, now she had to lie in it. I got out of my car and walked up to her, arms crossed, leaning against the porch railing. You've got until tomorrow to get your stuff and go, I said, skipping any kind of greeting. She blinked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. Jake, please, can't we at least try to talk? She asked, her voice shaky. I sighed and shook my head. What's left to talk about, Sarah? You cheated. You lied. You broke our marriage. Now you're out of chances. It's over. She opened her mouth, but no words came out, realizing there was nothing she could say to change my mind. I still love you, she muttered, almost like she was trying to convince herself. I let out a bitter laugh. Yeah, well, I used to love you too. But that was before you decided Chad was worth more than everything we had. No. I don't feel a damn thing. Her face crumpled, and for a moment I thought she might try to beg again, but instead, she just nodded, defeated. Fine, she whispered. I'll pack my things. I watched her walk inside, and for the first time in days, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. This was it, the end of the line. As she packed, I stood in the living room, watching her toss her clothes into boxes, her movements slow and sluggish, like she was in some kind of daze. A part of me wanted to feel bad for her, but I couldn't, not after everything that had happened. It took a few hours, but by the time she was done, the house felt lighter, like the air itself had been suffocating me, and now I could finally breathe again. She dragged the last of her bags out to her car, and I followed her to the front door. Goodbye, Sarah, I said flatly, my voice cold and final. She turned to look at me one last time, her eyes filled with regret. Goodbye, Jake, she whispered, and without another word, got in her car and drove away. I watched her taillights fade into the distance, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. But just when I thought it was all over, life threw one last curveball at me. After Sarah's car disappeared down the street, I stood there for a while, staring at the empty road, feeling a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. I thought it was finally over. I headed back inside, ready to collapse on the couch and enjoy the peace and quiet of my new, Sarah-free life. But as I walked into the living room, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Jessica. We need to talk. Call me when you can. I raised an eyebrow at Jessica's text. We'd been staying in touch, but this felt different, urgent. Without hesitating, I dialed her number and pressed the phone to my ear as I sat down. Hey, what's up? I asked. Her voice sounded shaky, like she was trying to hold back tears. Jake, I just found out something about Chad. Something you need to know. My heart sank. What now? I thought we'd already hit rock bottom in this whole nightmare. Okay, hit me, I said, bracing myself. She hesitated for a moment, then dropped the bomb. Chad wasn't just seeing Sarah. He was seeing other women too. A lot of them. I found messages, emails, it wasn't just her. My jaw clenched. You're telling me Sarah wasn't even his only affair? Not even close, Jessica said, her voice dripping with bitterness. Chad's been cheating on me with multiple women, and from what I can gather, Sarah was just one of many. I thought you should know. I sat there, stunned. Sarah hadn't been swept off her feet by some guy. She was just one in a long line of conquests for this dirtbag. My anger, which I thought had already peaked, flared up all over again. The fact that Sarah had thrown away our marriage for that, for some serial cheater who didn't give a damn about her, made the whole thing even more pathetic. Thanks for telling me, I finally said, still trying to wrap my head around it. I guess it's just more proof that they both deserve whatever's coming. Jessica sighed. Yeah, it's been a rough few days. I'm filing for divorce, obviously, but I don't know, Jake. It just feels like a bad dream. I can't believe this is my life now. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Trust me, I get it. But you're doing the right thing. We both are. We're better off without them. She was quiet for a moment, then said, You're right. It's just hard to see that sometimes, you know? I do. But we'll get through it. They're the ones who'll have to live with the consequences of their choices. We talked for a little longer, mostly about how ridiculous the whole situation was. How Chad and Sarah had managed to destroy 2 marriages for a fling that, in the grand scheme of things, meant absolutely nothing. It was almost laughable, except neither of us was in the mood to laugh. When we hung up, I sat there, staring at my phone. Sarah didn't know yet about Chad's other affairs, that she wasn't special. Part of me wanted to tell her, throw it in her face, and watch her crumble under the weight of her own stupidity. But another part of me didn't care anymore. She wasn't my problem. Not anymore. A few days passed, and I started settling into a new routine. The house was quieter, cleaner, and most importantly, free of the tension that had been hanging over it for months. Sarah tried texting me a couple more times, begging for another chance, but I ignored her. It was over. I'd made my peace with it. Then, one evening, I got another surprise. There was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Jessica standing there, looking just as tired and worn out as I felt. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey," I replied, stepping aside to let her in. We sat down in the living room, and for a while, we just talked. Not about Sarah and Chad, not about the affairs, but about life. About what comes next. It was strange, sitting there with someone who had been through the exact same storm, yet still felt like a stranger in many ways. But at the same time, it was comforting. We were both trying to navigate the wreckage, figure out how to rebuild. Eventually, Jessica gave me a small, tired smile. "You know," she said, "it's weird, but I feel like we're going to be okay. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually." I nodded. "Yeah. We will." And for the first time since this whole mess began, I actually believed it. As we sat there in comfortable silence, I realized something. Betrayal can break you. It can tear your world apart and make you question everything. But it doesn't have to define you. It doesn't have to be the end. You can pick up the pieces, rebuild, and even find a little light in the darkness. Sarah and Chad? They were just chapters in our stories. And now? Well, now we were writing new ones. That's my story. If you're reading this and going through something similar, just know there's life after betrayal. You can survive it. You can move on. And who knows? Maybe, just maybe, you'll find something better on the other side. Dear listeners, thank you for your incredible support and for tuning into my stories on YouTube. Your enthusiasm and feedback mean the world to me. Stay tuned for more exciting tales. Warm regards.